He wasn't looking for redemption, the smell of unburned hydrocarbons and stale sweat. That's all Thursday was supposed to be. Just a straight run down the I-95, asphalt baking under tires. Wade wasn't looking for a kid with bruised knuckles to grab his cut and ask for a miracle. You think a patch makes a man immune to the ghost stories of this city? It doesn't. When he followed her into that rotting house, the smell of copper and old dust hit him. And what he saw broke every rule he had left. The heat coming off the asphalt was thick enough to chew. It warped the air above the gas pumps, making the sun-bleached awning of the Sinclair station ripple like a mirage. 30 V-twin engines idled in the lot, a concussive, syncopated rhythm that rattled the loose corrugated tin of the roof. It was loud. It was always loud. Wade was leaning against the peeling yellow bollard near Pump 4, staring at the numbers ticking by on the digital display. $90 to fill the tank. His skull throbbed with a low-grade hangover, the kind that sits right behind the eyes and pulses in time with a shovelhead exhaust. Sweat crawled down his spine, itching where the heavy leather of his cut pressed against his T-shirt. The bottom rocker on his back read, California. The center patch, the winged death head, felt heavier today than it had in 20 years. Wade! Wade didn't turn. He just kept watching the gallon counter. What, Bobby? Bull says we roll in 5. Kickstands up. Bobby was a prospect. Young, dumb, eager to prove he belonged in the dirt and the noise. He smelled like cheap deodorant and nervous energy. Tell Bull I heard him the first time. Wade grunted, finally pulling the nozzle from the tank. A few drops of premium spilled onto the hot chrome of the exhaust pipe, hissing and vaporizing instantly into a sharp, chemical stench. He screwed the gas cap back on, the metallic scrape loud even over the engines. He was reaching for his wallet when he felt it. It wasn't a grab. It wasn't the heavy hand of a cop or the aggressive shove of a drunk looking for a story to tell his friends. It was a tug. Light, hesitant, but firm enough to pull the heavy cowhide of his vest downward. He turned, his hand instinctively dropping towards the heavy buckle of his belt. His eyes tracked down. She couldn't have been more than 7. She was standing barely an arm's length away, squarely in his shadow. Her hair was a matted nest of dirty blonde, clinging to her forehead in damp, greasy strings. She wore a T-shirt that might have been pink once, but was now a mottled canvas of dirt, grease, and something dark and rust-colored near the collar. She was barefoot on the blistering concrete, but it wasn't the dirt that caught him. It was the smell. Beneath the ambient odor of exhaust and hot tar, she smelled like sour milk, like unwashed laundry left in a damp pile, like a house that had given up. "Mister," she said. Her voice was barely a rasp, scraped hollow by dehydration or disuse. Wade took a half step back, creating distance. He didn't do kids. Kids look at the patch and see a pirate. Parents look at the patch and see a predator. "Beat it, kid. You're too close to the pipes. You'll burn your legs." He turned back to the pump, shoving his wallet into his back pocket. The tug came again. Harder this time. Her small fingers had curled around the bottom edge of his cut, gripping the leather so tightly her knuckles were white beneath a layer of grime. He looked down again, a flare of genuine annoyance rising in his chest. "I said back off!" She didn't flinch. Her eyes, a pale, washed-out blue, stared up at him. They were flat. There was no childish panic in them, no tears, just a terrifying, bottomless fatigue. It was the look of a stray dog that had been kicked enough times to know crying didn't stop the boot. "Please," she whispered. She swallowed hard, her small throat bobbing. "Please help my grandma." Wade let out a slow breath through his teeth. Around them, the engines were revving higher. The pack was getting restless. Bull, a 300-pound mountain of ink and bad attitude, was already straddling his road king near the exit, glaring in his direction. "Look," Wade said, crouching down slightly, the leather of his boots creaking. He kept his voice low, dropping the menace. "I'm not a cop. I'm not a fireman. You need help, you go inside to the guy behind the register. Tell him to call 911. She shook her head. A slow, mechanical, side-to-side motion. "No cops. Grandma said no cops. They'll take me." "Then find somebody else." Wade stood up, grabbing the handlebars of his diner. He swung his leg over the saddle. The heat radiating from the engine block scorched his inner thigh through the denim of his jeans. He hit the starter, and the bike roared to life, drowning out whatever she said next. He looked down. She was still standing there. She hadn't backed away from the noise. She just stood perfectly still, her arms dropping to her sides. She looked incredibly small against the backdrop of the massive, vibrating machines. He revved the engine. "Just put it in gear, Wade." He looked at the rust-colored stain on her collar. It wasn't paint. He'd seen enough bar fights and bad nights to know what dried blood looked like. "God damn it," he muttered. He killed the engine. The sudden silence from his bike felt deafening. Bull was laying on his horn. 2 short, aggressive blasts, the universal signal for move your ass. Wade ignored him, kicking the side stand down with a heavy metallic clank. He stepped off the bike and walked toward the Road King. Bull's face, a road map of burst capillaries and deep scars, was twisted in a scowl behind his wraparound shades. "The hell are you doing, Wade?" Bull barked over the din of his idol. "We're losing daylight." "Got a fouled plug?" Wade lied smoothly. "Bike's running like garbage. I'm going to pull it round back, let it cool, swap it out." Bull revved his engine, irritated. "You want Bobby to stay with you?" "No, I'll catch up. Save me a stool in Bakersfield." Bull didn't like it. The club moves together. But Wade had been wearing the patch longer than he'd been riding 2 wheels. He gave him a curt nod, a sharp jerk of his chin. "Don't dawdle." He dumped the clutch, and the pack rolled out. 30 bikes pulling onto the highway, a localized earthquake that rattled the windows of the gas station. Wade watched them go, the red tail lights shrinking in the heat haze. The sudden emptiness of the parking lot felt strange. The silence felt heavy. He turned around. The girl was still by pump 4. Wade walked back to her, his boots crunching on the grit. He stopped a few feet away, putting his hands on his hips. "Where is she?" he asked. The girl didn't smile. She just turned and started walking toward the back of the gas station, leading toward a dense line of overgrown oleander bushes that separated the commercial lot from a crumbling residential neighborhood. Wade followed. He felt ridiculous. He felt exposed. A 50-year-old biker walking behind a silent, filthy child through a break in a rusted chain-link fence. The air back here was dead. The breeze from the highway didn't penetrate the thick brush. The smell of hot asphalt faded, replaced by the scent of dry, rotting vegetation and the faint, unmistakable odor of raw sewage. "What's your name?" he asked the back of her head. "Lily," she said. She didn't look back. "I'm Wade. Like the oven?" He snorted, a short, ugly sound. "No, like the country." They crossed an alleyway littered with blown-out tires and shattered glass. The heat was stifling. They entered a neighborhood that time and money had completely forgotten. The houses were small, single-story structures built in the 50s, now sagging under the weight of decades of neglect. Lawns were patches of yellowed dirt and aggressively thriving weeds. Driveways held the rusting husks of cars on cinder blocks. As they walked, Wade felt eyes on him. A curtain twitched in a window. A man sitting on a porch, shirtless and drinking from a brown paper bag, stopped mid-sip to stare. Wade's hand brushed the heavy folding knife clipped to his front pocket. He wasn't scared of a bad neighborhood. He'd lived in them most of his life. But he hated not knowing what he was walking into. "How far, Lily?" "Just there." She pointed. It was the worst house on a bad street. The paint, which might have been white decades ago, was peeling off in long grey strips like a severe sunburn. The roof sagged ominously in the center. The front windows were covered from the inside with yellowing newspaper and black garbage bags secured with duct tape. The front yard was a jungle of knee-high grass, littered with plastic toys faded by the sun and half buried in the dirt. A deep, visceral sense of wrongness settled in his gut. It wasn't fear, it was revulsion. It was the instinct of a rat smelling poison in the bait. "She's inside," Lily said, stopping at the edge of the cracked concrete walkway. She looked at him, and for the first time he saw a flicker of hesitation in her flat eyes. "Why'd you come to the gas station, Lily? Why me? You had a skull on your back," she said, her voice dropping to a whisper. "Grandma said the men with skulls are dangerous. She said they hurt people." Wade felt his jaw tighten. "And you wanted me to hurt somebody?" "I don't know how to wake her up," Lily said. The contradiction hit him like a physical blow, the innocence of the statement mashed up against the cold, dead look in her eyes. He exhaled slowly, pushing past her. The wooden steps leading to the porch bowed under his weight, groaning in protest. The front door was heavy solid wood, the veneer chipped. There was no screen door. He didn't knock. He reached out and turned the brass knob. It wasn't locked. The latch clicked loudly in the oppressive quiet of the afternoon. He pushed the door open. The smell hit him before his eyes could adjust to the gloom. It was a physical wall of scent, so thick he instinctively brought his forearm up to his nose. It was a chaotic mix. Cheap, pine-scented cleaner, stale cigarette smoke, the heavy, sweet smell of rotting food. And beneath it all, threading through the chemical pine and garbage, was the unmistakable, coppery tang of old blood and the sour stench of voided bowels. He stepped over the threshold, his boots loud on the linoleum floor of the entryway. "Grandma?" Lily called out from behind him, her voice small, almost swallowed by the heavy air of the house. "Stay by the door, kid," Wade rasped. He stood still for a moment, letting his eyes dilate. The windows were blacked out, and the only light came from a single, bare bulb burning in a hallway down the back. The living room to his right was a cave of shadows. The silence inside the house wasn't empty. It was heavy, pressurized. The air conditioning was off, and the house felt like the inside of a sealed Tupperware container left in the sun. Sweat was running freely down his temples now. Wade pulled his flashlight from his belt, a heavy mag light that doubled as a club if needed, and clicked it on. The harsh white beam sliced through the darkness, illuminating dust motes dancing lazily in the air. He swept the beam across the room. The place was a hoarder's paradise. Stacks of old newspapers, junk mail, and cardboard boxes formed precarious towers against the walls. The carpet was a map of dark, unidentifiable stains. Then the beam caught the recliner in the center of the room. He froze. His breath hitched in his throat. "Jesus Christ," he muttered, taking a step back. She was sitting in the chair. An elderly woman, her head lolled back at an unnatural angle, staring sightlessly at the water-stained ceiling. Her mouth was slack. Her skin was a mottled pale grey, taking on the waxy sheen of something that had ceased to be human a while ago. The smell was coming from her. She had been dead for at least 2 days in this heat. But it wasn't the corpse that made his blood run cold. He'd seen dead bodies. He'd caused a few. It was what was surrounding her. The woman was bound to the recliner. Thick, silver duct tape was wrapped around her torso, securing her to the faded upholstery. Her wrists were taped to the armrests, but the tape wasn't applied violently. It was neat, meticulous. He took a slow step forward, shining the light down. Her lap was covered in cash. Stacks of $20 and $50 bills, bound in rubber bands, piled haphazardly over her legs. There had to be 50 grand sitting there, and right next to her limp, taped hand, resting on the side table, was a child's coloring book. A pink crayon was resting perfectly parallel to the edge of the book. Wade swung the flashlight down to the floor at the base of the chair. There was an industrial-sized plastic bowl, the kind you use to mix dough. It was half filled with water. Next to it was a sponge, dark and crusty. He spun around, the heavy beam of the maglight catching Lily in the doorway. She was clutching the doorframe, her dirty face impassive. "Lily," he said, his voice sounding harsh, strained in the quiet room. "Who did this?" "I did," she said. His brain short-circuited. "You tied her up?" "She was falling over," Lily said, matter-of-factly, stepping into the foul-smelling room. She didn't look at the corpse with horror. She looked at it with mild frustration. "She fell over 2 days ago. I couldn't lift her. I had to drag her to the chair. The tape keeps her from falling out." Wade stared at the little girl, his mind reeling. He looked back at the corpse. The dark stain on Lily's collar. It was blood. It was from dragging a dead weight. "What about the money?" He pointed the light at the fortune, sitting on the dead woman's lap. "Where did that come from?" Lily walked over to the chair, entirely unfazed by the smell of decay. She reached out and patted the dead woman's knee, her small, dirty hand resting inches from a stack of 50s. "That's the medicine money," Lily said. "The men in the suits brought it last week. They yelled a lot. They said Grandma had to keep it safe." But then she went to sleep and got cold. Wade felt a cold sweat break out across his chest. The men in the suits. This wasn't a tragic poverty case. This was a stash house. This old woman, whoever she was holding money for someone very bad, and she had dropped dead of natural causes in the middle of it. "Lily," he said, his voice dropping to a harsh whisper. He turned the flashlight off, plunging the room back into the suffocating gloom. The single bulb down the hall suddenly felt like a spotlight. "Who were the men?" "I don't know," she said. She looked down at the floor, nudging the water bowl with her bare toe. "I tried to wash her, like she washes me when I'm sick, but the water didn't wake her up." He squeezed the bridge of his nose, fighting the sudden, violent urge to vomit. It wasn't the smell anymore. It was the sheer, crushing reality of this kid living in a dark oven for 2 days, taping a corpse to a chair and washing it, surrounded by cartel cash. "Walk away, Wade!" The voice in his head was screaming. "This is cartel business. This is how you end up in a barrel in the desert. Walk out the door, get on the bike, and ride." He looked at the door. Freedom was 30 feet away. Then he heard it. A heavy metallic clunk from the front yard. The unmistakable sound of a car door slamming shut. Followed by another. Heavy footsteps crunched on the gravel walkway outside. Wade killed the flashlight. The darkness rushed in, thick and absolute. He grabbed Lily by the shoulder, his large hand enveloping her thin collarbone. He yanked her hard behind the recliner, pressing her down into the filth of the carpet. "Don't make a sound." He breathed into her ear, his hand dropping instinctively to the heavy grip of the .45 tucked into the small of his back. The porch steps groaned. A shadow fell across the thin gap of light beneath the front door. Somebody turned the knob. The front door didn't swing open. It scraped across the warped linoleum with a heavy, agonizing screech. A wedge of harsh afternoon sunlight cut into the gloom, throwing long, distorted shadows across the mountains of garbage. 2 silhouettes stepped inside. The door clicked shut, plunging the room back into that suffocating, oppressive darkness. Behind the recliner, Wade's knees ached where they dug into the filthy carpet. He held Lily tight against his chest. She was completely rigid. She didn't tremble, didn't whimper. She felt like a piece of dry firewood wrapped in dirty fabric. His right hand hovered over the textured grip of the Kimber 1911 at his lower back, his thumb resting on the safety. "Jesus, what is that smell?" a voice muttered. It was a nasally, impatient whine. A city accent. Not local. "Shut up, Tommy! Just grab the bag and let's go!" A second, deeper voice replied. Heavy footsteps moved past the entryway. The beam of a tactical flashlight clicked on, infinitely brighter than his old maglight. The white circle of light danced erratically over the piles of newspapers, illuminating the swirling dust before sweeping towards the center of the room. It hit the recliner. "Whoa! Hey, Ray, look at this!" The beam settled on the corpse. Wade heard a sharp intake of breath. The second man, Ray, stepped forward, his boots crunching on something brittle. "What the hell?" Ray said, his voice dropping an octave, losing its confident edge. "Is she—" "She's dead, man. She's rotting. Look at her skin." Tommy sounded panicked, the nasally whine pitching up into genuine distress. "And she's taped to the chair." "I can see that, Tommy. Shut up and let me think." The flashlight beam moved off the woman's waxy face and dropped to her lap. The thick stacks of bound cash glared under the bright LED. "The money's still here," Ray said slowly. The greed in his voice temporarily overpowered the disgust. "Nobody took the drop. It's just sitting there." "I don't like this, Ray. Somebody taped her up. The boss said an old lady and a kid. Where's the kid?" "I don't care about the kid. Get the duffel. Load it up. Hold your breath if you have to." The beam of light swung erratically as Tommy moved closer to the chair. Wade could hear the rustle of a nylon bag being unzipped. They were less than 10 feet away. If Tommy stepped around the back of the recliner to get a better angle at the cash, he would trip right over them. Wade's heart battered against his ribs, a heavy, arrhythmic thudding that he swore they could hear. He was 52 years old. His left knee had a titanium pin in it from a wreck in 2008, and his lungs were coated in decades of Marlboro ash. He wasn't an action hero. He was a mechanic and an enforcer for a motorcycle club, and his fighting style consisted entirely of hitting first and hitting with whatever was heavy. Tommy's footsteps shuffled closer to the side of the chair. The nylon bag rustled. "Man, she smells like a backed-up sewer line." "Just grab the stacks," Ray growled. The light drifted down, illuminating the floor next to the chair. The beam caught the child's coloring book. Then it caught something else. It caught the toe of Wade's heavy, steel-toed biker boot, protruding just an inch past the edge of the recliner's shadow. The flashlight beam stopped dead. It held steady on the scuffed black leather of his boot. "Ray," Tommy whispered, the panic returning instantly. "Ray, there's somebody behind the—" Wade didn't wait for him to finish the sentence. He shoved Lily hard to the left, sending her tumbling into a stack of cardboard boxes. In the same motion, he exploded upward. His joints popped in loud, violent protest. He didn't draw the gun. A gunshot would bring the neighborhood out, and then the cops. He pulled the heavy maglite from his belt instead. Tommy was turning toward him, his eyes wide in the backscatter of his own flashlight. He was young, maybe 25, wearing a cheap, ill-fitting grey suit that stank of stale sweat and cheap cologne. Wade swung the maglite like a baseball bat. The heavy aluminum cylinder connected with the side of Tommy's jaw with a sickening, wet crunch. He didn't even have time to raise his hands. The impact spun him violently, the tactical flashlight flying from his grip and clattering across the floor. He dropped like a sack of wet cement, his head bouncing once on the stained carpet. Ray reacted fast. He reached inside his suit jacket. Wade lunged over Tommy's motionless body, closing the distance before Ray could clear his holster. He drove his left shoulder squarely into his chest. The impact knocked the wind out of him in a loud, forced grunt. They crashed backward into a towering pile of old magazines. The stack collapsed around them in a cascade of glossy paper. Ray was strong. Panic strength. He clawed at Wade's face, his nails tearing a hot, burning line down his cheek. He was still trying to pull his weapon. Wade pinned his right arm against his side with his knee, dropping his full 240 pounds onto his ribs. He thrashed violently. Wade raised the maglite and brought it down hard on his collarbone. Bone snapped loudly in the quiet room. Ray screamed, a high, reedy sound of absolute agony. He went limp, his left hand clutching at his shattered shoulder. Wade didn't stop. He grabbed him by the lapels of his cheap suit, hauled him up an inch, and slammed the back of his head against the solid wood of the floorboards. His eyes rolled back, fluttering shut. He let out a long, rattling breath and went still. He stayed there for a second, straddling him, his chest heaving. The adrenaline dump was making his hands shake violently. Acid burned in the back of his throat. His cheek was bleeding, the warm copper dripping down into his beard. The silence of the house rushed back in, thicker and heavier than before, broken only by his ragged breathing and the faint rustle of dust settling. "Lily," he rasped, his voice sounding like ground glass. He looked over. The tactical flashlight was rolling lazily across the floor, its beam spinning. In the strobe-like illumination, he saw her. She had crawled out of the cardboard boxes. She wasn't looking at the bleeding men. She wasn't looking at him. She was looking at the cash on her grandmother's lap. "We have to go," Wade said, forcing himself off Ray's chest. His knee screamed in protest. He grabbed her by the arm, not gently this time. He hauled her toward the back of the house. They couldn't go out the front. If there was a driver waiting in the car, he wasn't walking out into the sun with a target on his back. They tore through the kitchen. The smell here was different, rancid grease and sour milk. He kicked the back door open. The rusted deadbolt sheared right off the rotting wood frame. The harsh sunlight hit him like a physical blow. They hit the overgrown backyard at a dead run. Wade kept his hand firmly clamped around Lily's wrist, practically dragging her through the knee-high weeds. Thorns tore at his jeans. He didn't care. The only thing echoing in his head was the ticking clock. Tommy and Ray weren't dead, just broken. When they woke up, or when their boss realized they hadn't checked in, this house was going to swarm. They burst through the rusted chain-link fence at the back of the property, stumbling into the alleyway. "My shoes," Lily said, her voice surprisingly steady, though she was panting hard. "I left my shoes." "You don't need 'em," he growled, pulling her along. "Keep moving." They cut back through the oleander bushes, the dry branches whipping at his face. The oppressive heat of the afternoon felt almost welcoming after the stagnant, corpse-scented air of the house. The Sinclair station came into view. The lot was empty now, devoid of the 30 roaring bikes, just a few civilian cars pumping gas. His diner stood right where he had left it, a gleaming mass of black chrome and heavy steel, ticking slightly as the engine block cooled in the sun. He marched up to the bike, threw his leg over the saddle, and reached down to grab Lily. He hoisted her up by the armpits. She was shockingly light, like a bundle of hollow bird bones. He set her down on the leather pillion seat behind him. "Hold on to my belt," he commanded, looking over his shoulder. "Wrap your arms around me and don't let go. You understand? If you let go, you fall off and you die." She didn't nod. She just leaned forward, her small, filthy arms wrapping around his thick waist. Her hands gripped the heavy leather of his cut. He could feel her small ribs pressing against his back through his t-shirt. He hit the starter. The V-twin erupted, a guttural, ground-shaking roar that tore through the quiet afternoon. He didn't let it warm up. He kicked it into first gear, dumped the clutch, and twisted the throttle. The rear tire spun, spitting a rooster tail of gravel against the gas pumps before catching the asphalt. They shot out of the parking lot, merging violently onto the I-95 on-ramp. The wind hit them instantly. It wasn't a cool breeze, it was a blast furnace. The hot air roared in his ears, tearing at his clothes. The highway lines became a solid, white blur. He pushed the bike to 80, weaving through the sparse afternoon traffic. He watched his mirrors obsessively. Every black SUV, every dark sedan looked like a hit squad. The paranoia was a cold, hard knot in his stomach, fighting the heat of the engine between his thighs. "What the hell did you just do, Wade?" The rule in the club was simple. You don't bring outside heat to the table. You don't start wars that don't pay. He had just assaulted 2 bagmen for an organization that moved 50 grand in cash through a rotting suburban stash house. They saw his patch. They saw the winged death head on his back. If they had half a brain, they'd report it up the chain. He was bringing a cartel war down on the California chapter. He felt a slight tightening around his waist. Lily's grip on his belt had increased. He glanced down. Her small, dirty fingers were locked tight, her knuckles bone white. The wind was whipping her matted blonde hair into a frenzy. He had a passenger, a piece of collateral damage that he couldn't just drop off at a police station. No cops, the grandma had said. If he gave her to the system, the men in suits would find her in foster care within a week. She knew what they looked like. She knew the drop house. She was a liability to them. He couldn't take her to the clubhouse. Bull would take one look at the situation, realize the heat she brought, and tell him to dump her on a corner. Or worse, the club survived by being ruthless. You don't survive 50 years in the outlaw life by running an orphanage. He needed a place off the board. He took the exit for Highway 14, banking hard, the foot pegs scraping the asphalt in a shower of orange sparks. He headed north, toward the deep desert. The city faded away, replaced by the barren, scrub-brush landscape of the Antelope Valley. The air grew drier, smelling of sage and hot dust. The highway stretched out, a black ribbon cutting through the cracked, sun-baked earth. 40 miles later, he downshifted, the engine popping and burbling on deceleration. He pulled onto a dirt road that looked like nothing more than a goat path. They rode for another 2 miles, a cloud of fine, choking dust billowing out behind them. Ahead, sitting in a depression surrounded by rusted-out husks of classic cars, was a corrugated metal building. A faded wooden sign above the large, sliding doors read, "Garrett's Customs." He killed the engine and let the bike coast to a halt on the hard-packed dirt. The silence of the desert was absolute. The only sound was the ticking of his exhaust and the faint, high-pitched whine of wind cutting through the metal roof of the garage. He reached back and tapped Lily's arm. "We're here. Let go." She released his belt slowly. He swung his leg off and turned to her. She looked worse in the bright desert sunlight. The dirt on her face was caked into dry, cracked mud. The rust-colored bloodstain on her collar was glaringly obvious. Her eyes were still that flat, washed-out blue. "Where are we?" she asked. Her voice was completely devoid of emotion. "Safe harbor," he said. The heavy metal door of the garage rolled up with a deafening clatter. Standing in the bay was Garrett. He was a man built like a fire plug, 60 years old, bald, with a thick grey mustache stained yellow at the center from chain smoking. He wore dark blue coveralls that were more grease than fabric. He was wiping his massive hands on a red shop rag. He took one look at Wade, the bleeding scratch down his face, and the tiny, filthy child standing behind his leg. "Jesus, Wade," Garrett rasped, his voice sounding like a ruined transmission. "You look like 10 miles of bad road. Whose stray is that?" "Long story, Garrett," Wade said, walking into the cooler shade of the garage. The smell inside was comforting. Familiar, carburetor cleaner, burnt motor oil, and the sharp ozone tang of an arc welder. It was a smell that made sense. "I need a place to go to ground for a few hours, and I need a favor." Garrett threw the rag onto a workbench, littered with dismembered carburetor parts. "You know my rule. No club business in my shop. I don't want Bull's drama on my property." "It's not club business. It's personal." Garrett looked at Lily. His hard, craggy face softened just a fraction. He walked over to a battered mini-fridge in the corner, pulled out a bottle of water, and cracked it open. He handed it to Lily. "Drink it slow, kid." Garrett said gently, "You look dehydrated." Lily took the bottle with both hands. She didn't say thank you. She just stared at it for a second before taking a small, calculated sip. "Got a bathroom with a sink in the back," Garrett said to Wade, gesturing with his chin. "Take her back there. Use the Gojo soap. It cuts the grease. Then you and me are gonna talk." Wade steered Lily toward the back of the shop. The bathroom was a concrete bunker, smelling heavily of bleach and industrial soap. He turned on the tap. The water ran brown for a second before clearing. He squirted a massive dollop of the gritty orange Gojo onto his hands. "Come here," he said. Lily stepped up to the sink. She didn't resist. He wet his hands and started scrubbing her face. He was rougher than he meant to be, his large, calloused hands clumsy against her delicate skin. The orange soap cut through the layers of grime, the water in the sink turning a dark, murky grey. Beneath the dirt, she had pale skin and a dusting of freckles across her nose. But there was no life in her face. It was a mask. "What's your grandma's name, Lily?" he asked quietly, rinsing the soap away. "Ruth," she said softly. "And the men who brought the money, the men in the suits, how many times did they come?" "Just once. Last week," Lily said, looking down at the swirling grey water in the drain. "They told Grandma they needed a clean house. They said if she didn't hold the bag, they would take me away. Grandma cried. She put the bag in the closet, but then she fell asleep." Wade grabbed a stiff paper towel and began drying her face. A clean house. They used an old woman and a kid as camouflage. Nobody suspects the sagging house with toys in the yard. It was a standard, brutal cartel tactic. "Did you take any of the money, Lily?" he asked. He needed to know if they were carrying a tracker. She shook her head. "Grandma said it was poison. She said if we touched it, we would die." Smart woman, he thought. Unfortunately, it hadn't saved her. He finished drying her face and stepped back. "Go sit on that stool by Garrett's toolbox," he told her. "Don't touch any tools." She padded out of the bathroom on bare feet. Wade stood at the sink, staring at his reflection in the cracked mirror. He looked old. The scratch down his cheek was already swelling, an ugly, crusted red line. He splashed cold water on his face, letting it run down his neck, mixing with the sweat. He walked back out into the garage. Lily was sitting exactly where he had told her to, her hands folded in her lap. Garrett was standing by the bike, holding a mug of black coffee. "You hit somebody, Wade," Garrett said quietly, pointing to his right knuckle. The skin was split, a deep, bruised purple from where he'd shattered Tommy's jaw. "And your front tire is covered in some kind of biological. I broke 2 guys," Wade said, keeping his voice low so Lily couldn't hear. "In a stash house down in the basin, an old woman died of natural causes. The kid taped her to a chair to keep her from falling over. The cartel's money was sitting on her lap." Garrett lowered his coffee mug. His eyes went wide. "You left a cartel stash? And you hit the bagmen?" "I had to get the kid out. They were walking in right over us." "Wade!" Garrett hissed, stepping closer. "You're a dead man. They saw the cut? They saw the patch?" "Yeah." "Then the whole club is dead. You brought a war down on the Angels. Bull is going to execute you himself before the cartel even gets the chance." Wade looked over at Lily. She had pulled her legs up onto the stool and rested her chin on her knees. She looked incredibly fragile amidst the heavy steel, the chains, and the hydraulic lifts. Garrett was right. The club demanded absolute loyalty. He had jeopardized 30 brothers for a stray kid. It defied logic. It defied every instinct of survival he had honed over 3 decades in the outlaw life. But when he closed his eyes, he didn't see the patch. He didn't see Bull's angry face. He saw the pink crayon sitting next to the bound stacks of cash. He smelled the sour milk and the decay. He saw the terrifying, broken calm of a 7-year-old girl who didn't know how to cry anymore. "I need your burner phone, Garrett," he said softly, opening his eyes. Garrett stared at him for a long moment, reading the terrifying finality in his expression. He set his coffee mug down on the workbench. He reached into the front pocket of his greasy coveralls, pulled out a cheap, plastic prepaid cell phone, and tossed it to him. Wade caught it. "What are you going to do, Wade?" Garrett asked, his voice tight. "I'm going to call Bull," he said, his thumb hovering over the keypad. "And then I'm going to commit treason." The cheap plastic of the burner phone felt unnaturally light in his hand. It didn't have the heavy metallic weight of a gun or a wrench, but it was about to do infinitely more damage. He punched in a number he had memorized 15 years ago. He walked away from Garrett and Lily, stepping out the side door of the garage into the harsh glare of the desert afternoon. The heat was baking the hard-packed dirt, sending shimmering waves up around the rusted husks of old cars. He leaned against the corrugated metal siding of the building. It burned through his T-shirt, but he needed the anchor. The phone rang twice. "Yeah," a voice rumbled. It was Bull. Wade could hear the background noise, the clinking of beer bottles, the low hum of a jukebox, the collective rowdy murmur of 30 men blowing off steam in a Bakersfield dive bar. His throat tightened. 30 years. 30 years of blood, miles, and loyalty. You don't just walk away from the patch. You bleed out of it or you get beaten out of it. "It's Wade," he said. His voice was completely flat. The background noise on the other end dropped slightly as Bull stepped away from the bar. "You better be on a tow truck, brother. We're 2 pitchers deep." "I'm not coming to Bakersfield, Bull." A pause. The wind howled softly across the desert floor, kicking up a fine spray of sand that stung his shins. "What's wrong with the bike?" Bull asked, his tone shifting from annoyed to suspicious. "Bike's fine. It runs." Wade squeezed his eyes shut, pressing the bridge of his nose. The split knuckle on his right hand throbbed in time with his pulse. "I caught a stray, Bull, down in the basin. I hit 2 guys. Who did you hit?" The rumble in Bull's voice was gone, replaced by a cold, sharp edge. "Cartel bagmen, suit and tie guys. They were making a pickup at a stash house." The silence on the line was absolute. Even the jukebox seemed to have stopped. Bull wasn't stupid. He knew exactly what that meant. Cartels didn't operate on club rules. They didn't respect territory, and they didn't do sit-downs. They did drive-bys. They did firebombs. "You hit cartel money, men," Bull said, measuring out every single syllable, "while wearing the patch, on club time." "I wasn't on club time." Wade lied. The words tasted like ash. He had to make this a rogue operation. He had to sever the artery before the infection spread to the rest of the club. "I knew about the stash. I saw an angle. I wanted the cash for myself. I went back to roll them." It was a terrible lie, but it was the only narrative that would force Bull's hand. "You're telling me you went cowboy?" Bull breathed. The betrayal in his voice was raw, a physical thing coming through the tiny speaker. "You jeopardized the entire charter for a payday?" "Yeah." "Did you get the money?" "No, it went sideways. I had to leave it. But they saw my face. They saw the cut." Wade heard the sound of glass shattering on the other end. Bull had thrown his beer bottle against a brick wall. "You stupid, selfish son of a bitch!" Bull roared. "You know what they're gonna do? They're gonna look for a winged skull. Every brother on the road is a target now because of you. That's why I'm making this call, Bull," Wade said, opening his eyes and staring out at the empty, white-hot sky. "I'm taking the cutoff. I'm not a member of the California Charter anymore. I act alone. Tell the cartel I'm excommunicated. Tell them I went rogue. Put a bounty on my head if you have to. Make it public. You don't get to resign, Wade." Bull's voice cracked. "You don't take the patch off, we cut it off your dead back. You are out in bad standing. You hear me? If the cartel doesn't find you, we will. You're a dead man." "I know," he whispered. "Don't you ever wear our ink again. Don't you ever say my name." The line went dead with a harsh click. Wade stood there for a long time, the phone still pressed to his ear. His lungs felt hollow. His chest physically ached, a deep, crushing pressure right behind his sternum. He had just erased his entire existence. He had no brothers, no backup, no home. He was a 52-year-old man with a bad knee, a busted hand, and a target on his back from two of the most violent organizations on the West Coast. He lowered the phone and tossed it into the dirt. He crushed it beneath the heel of his heavy steel-toed boot, grinding the plastic into sharp, useless shards. He walked back into the garage. Garrett was leaning against his workbench. He took one look at his face and knew. He didn't ask questions. "I need wheels, Garrett," Wade said, his voice sounding hollow in the cavernous room. "Not 2, 4, something that blends in, something invisible." Garrett nodded slowly. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a ring of keys. He walked over to the back of the shop, where a heavy canvas tarp was draped over a bulky shape. He grabbed the corner and yanked it back, dust billowing into the air. It was a 1998 Ford F-150. Faded, oxidized maroon paint, dented tailgate, a cracked passenger-side mirror. It looked like a million other farm trucks scattered across the rural United States. "Belonged to my brother-in-law," Garrett said, patting the rusted hood. "He died 3 years ago. The title is signed, but I never registered it. Plates are out of state. It burns a little oil, but the transmission is solid." "I'll take it," Wade said. "I'm leaving the diner." Garrett winced. That bike was a custom build, 30 grand worth of tuned steel and chrome. "Wade, the bike is worth 5 of this truck. Keep it. Break it down for parts, or paint it and sell it. I don't care. I can't be seen on it." Wade pulled his wallet out of his back pocket. He had about $800 in cash. He handed it all to Garrett. "For the gas in the tank and the trouble I brought to your door." Garrett looked at the crumpled bills, then at him. He pushed his hand away. "Keep your money, Wade," he rasped, coughing into his fist. "You're gonna need it. Where are you heading?" "North," he said. "As far as the road goes." Wade turned to look at Lily. She was still sitting on the stool, her legs pulled up, watching them with those blank, terrifying eyes. She hadn't moved a muscle. "All right, kid," he said, walking over to her. "Time to go." The sun dipped below the jagged horizon of the mountains, dragging the temperature down with it. The desert doesn't cool off. It freezes over. The heat radiating off the asphalt vanished, replaced by a biting, dry chill that seeped through the floorboards of the old Ford. Wade had the heater cranked. It smelled like burning dust and ancient dog hair, but it blew hot air on Lily. She was sitting in the passenger seat, drowning in an old, grease-stained flannel shirt Garrett had given her. She had her knees pulled up to her chest, staring out the window at the endless expanse of black scrub brush rushing past. They were on Highway 395, hugging the eastern edge of the Sierras. It was a dark, desolate stretch of road. No streetlights, no traffic. Just the narrow beams of the Ford's headlights cutting through the absolute blackness. He glanced down at his hands on the steering wheel. His knuckles were swollen, the split skin weeping a clear fluid. His body ached in places he had forgotten about. The adrenaline crash had hit him an hour ago, leaving him hollowed out and jittery. But the heaviest thing in the cab wasn't the silence. It was the garbage bag sitting between them on the bench seat. Inside the heavy black plastic was his cut. Before they had left Garrett's, Wade had gone into the bathroom. He had unbuttoned the heavy cowhide vest and slipped it off his shoulders. It felt like tearing off a layer of his own skin. The leather was molded to his body. It smelled like rain, sweat, and cheap whiskey. It held 30 years of his life. He had folded it carefully, running his thumb over the thick embroidery of the winged skull, the bottom rocker that read California. Then he shoved it into the trash bag and tied it shut. He was wearing a plain grey t-shirt and a faded denim jacket Garrett had thrown in. He felt naked. He felt exposed, like a hermit crab yanked out of its shell. Without the cut, he wasn't Wade, the enforcer. He was just an aging, tired man in a stolen truck, running from ghosts. "Are we going to jail?" The voice was so small, so quiet over the rumble of the V8 engine, that he almost missed it. He looked over. Lily hadn't turned her head. She was still staring out into the dark. "No," Wade said, his voice rough. "We're not going to jail. Grandma said if you do bad things, the cops put you in a cage. Your grandma was right, most of the time," he said carefully, gripping the steering wheel tighter. "But the people we left behind in that house, they're worse than the cops. The cops put you in a cage. Those men put you in the ground." Lily finally turned to look at him. The glow from the dashboard illuminated her face. The dirt was gone, washed away by Garrett's industrial soap, revealing deep purple bags under her eyes. She looked like a miniature haunted adult. "Did you kill them?" she asked. The clinical detachment in her voice made the hairs on his arms stand up. "No," he said. "I just put them to sleep for a little while. Long enough for us to get away." "Why?" The word hung in the stale air of the cab. Why? He didn't have an answer. Not a logical one. He could have walked away. He should have walked away. Bull would still be his brother. He'd be sitting in Bakersfield right now, drinking cheap beer and complaining about the heat. Instead, he was driving a death trap pickup towards the Canadian border with a cartel target on his back. "Because," he started, pausing to find the words, "because putting duct tape on a dead lady so she doesn't fall over isn't a job for a kid." Lily looked down at her small hands, lost in the oversized sleeves of the flannel shirt. She didn't cry. She didn't sniffle. She just rubbed her thumb over her knuckles in a slow, rhythmic motion. "I was hungry," she whispered. There was no food in the house, just the money, and she smelled so bad. A sharp physical pain twisted in his gut. He reached over, his large, calloused hand hovering awkwardly over her shoulder for a second, before resting on the thick fabric of the flannel. "You don't have to smell it anymore," he said, his voice thick. "I promise you that. You never have to smell that house again." He pulled his hand back and focused on the road. The yellow lines flickered past in a hypnotic rhythm. They drove through the night. The miles chewed away at his sanity, the fatigue making shadows dance on the edge of the headlights. He drank lukewarm coffee from a thermos Garrett had packed, the bitter liquid burning his empty stomach. By dawn, they were crossing into Oregon. The landscape shifted from barren desert to towering pines and thick grey fog. The air outside the truck was freezing, turning the condensation on the inside of the windshield to ice. He knew where he was going. His name was Caleb. He used to run with a Nomad chapter out of the Pacific Northwest in the 80s. He caught a federal trafficking charge, did 15 years in Florence ADX, and came out a ghost. The club considered him retired. The law considered him irrelevant. He lived entirely off the grid in the deep woods of the Cascades. He owed Wade. During a riot in '94, Wade took a shiv to the rib cage that was meant for his kidney. They hadn't spoken in a decade, but outlaws have long memories for blood debts. They turned off the main highway onto a logging road that hadn't seen a grader in years. The Ford bounced and groaned over deep ruts and exposed roots. The dense canopy of pines blocked out the morning sun, throwing the forest into a permanent twilight. Lily was asleep, her head resting against the passenger window. She breathed through her mouth, small, ragged exhales that fogged the glass. After 10 miles of brutal climbing, the trees broke. A small clearing opened up, revealing a cabin constructed of rough-hewn logs and corrugated tin. A rusted wood stove pipe protruded from the roof, puffing lazy rings of white smoke into the frigid air. 3 massive, heavily scarred pit bulls erupted from under the porch, barking furiously as he killed the engine. The front door of the cabin opened. Caleb stepped out. He looked like an angry prophet. He was in his late 60s, a thick, tangled white beard reaching down to his sternum. He wore a heavy wool coat over thermal underwear and carried a 12-gauge pump-action shotgun resting casually against his hip. Wade opened the door and stepped out, keeping his hands empty and visible. The cold mountain air hit his lungs like shattered glass. "Call him off, Caleb," he shouted over the barking. Caleb narrowed his eyes, squinting through the morning mist. He lowered the shotgun a fraction. He let out a short, sharp whistle. The dogs instantly stopped barking and retreated to the porch, their eyes fixed on him. "Wade!" Caleb's voice was a gravelly rasp, thick with disuse. He stepped down off the porch, his boots crunching heavily on the frost-covered grass. He looked him up and down, noting the grey t-shirt, the lack of leather, the swollen face. "The hell happened to you? You look like you got dragged behind a freight train. Where's your colors?" "Buried," Wade said, walking toward him. "I'm out, Caleb. Bad standing." Caleb stopped walking. His grip tightened on the shotgun. In this life, bad standing meant you were a disease. You didn't associate with a dead man unless you wanted the infection. "If you're out, why the hell are you on my mountain?" Caleb growled. "Because I need to collect on that riot in '94, he said, stopping 10 feet from him. Caleb stared at him, the tension in his shoulders rigid. He looked at the bruised lines on his face, reading the desperation in his posture. Slowly he broke the action on the shotgun, popping the shell out of the chamber. "A debt is a debt," Caleb muttered, spitting into the dirt. "What do you need?" Wade turned and pointed at the Ford. "I need you to take the kid." Caleb stared at the truck, then back at Wade. He looked like Wade had just asked him to hold a live hand grenade. "A kid?" Caleb repeated, incredulous. "I'm a 68-year-old ex-con living 50 miles from a grocery store. I don't run a damn daycare, Wade. What kind of heat is on her?" "Cartel," he said flatly. Caleb let out a slow, hissing breath, his shoulders slumping. He looked up at the grey sky. "Of course it is. You burn your patch, you cross the border, and you bring cartel heat to my doorstep." "Jesus, Wade. She's a ghost, Caleb." Wade stepped closer, his voice low, urgent. "She lived in a stash house. Grandma died. Bagmen came to collect. I dropped them and took her. They don't know who she is, and they don't know where she went. They're looking for me. A big guy with a winged skull. Not a little girl." "Why didn't you just drop her at a police station?" "Because she knows their faces," he said fiercely. "If she goes into the system, they'll find her in foster care and cut her throat to tie up loose ends. She needs to disappear. You have the contacts. You know the document forgers in Seattle. Get her a new birth certificate, a new name. Keep her here until she's old enough to forget the smell of that house." Caleb rubbed his face with a gnarled hand. He looked at the cabin, at his quiet, isolated life, and then at the rusted Ford. "My sister," Caleb said quietly. "Up in Bellingham. She's civilian. Never touched the life. She runs a bakery. Always wanted kids, never could. I can make some calls, move some cash, get the paperwork sorted and send her up there." "Do it," Wade said, the relief washing over him so intensely his knees actually buckled a fraction. "It'll cost you," Caleb said, looking him in the eye. "Not money, I mean the heat. You can't stay here, Wade. If they're tracking you, they can't track you to her." "I know," he said. "I'm leaving in 5 minutes." He walked back to the passenger side of the truck. He opened the door. The harsh squeak of the hinges woke Lily. She blinked against the bright, grey morning light, rubbing her eyes with her small fists. "Are we there?" she asked, her voice thick with sleep. "Yeah, kid," he said. "We're here. Come on out." She slid off the bench seat, her bare feet hitting the frost-covered ground. She shivered instantly. He took off the denim jacket and wrapped it around her shoulders. It draped over her like a heavy blanket. He pointed to Caleb, who was standing a few yards away, leaning on his shotgun. "That's Caleb. He's going to take care of you for a little bit. Then he's going to take you to a lady who bakes cakes. She lives in a nice house. You're going to stay with her." Lily looked at Caleb, then up at him. The flat, dead expression in her eyes was starting to crack. The terror of the unknown was fighting through the trauma. "Are you coming?" she asked, her small fingers grabbing the hem of his t-shirt. Wade knelt down in the freezing dirt. The pain in his knee was agonizing, but he ignored it. He looked directly into her pale blue eyes. "No, Lily," he said softly. "I have to go for a drive. The bad men are looking for me. If I stay with you, they'll find us both. I'm going to drive far away so they follow me instead." Her bottom lip trembled. It was the most emotion he had seen from her since she grabbed his vest at the gas station. She didn't cry, but her breathing hitched, a small, terrified gasp. "You're brave, kid," Wade said, putting a hand on her cheek. His rough skin scraped against her pale face. "You survived that house. You can survive this, you hear me?" She nodded, a jerky, tiny motion. She reached into the pocket of the oversized flannel shirt. Her small hand emerged holding something. She pressed it into his palm. He looked down. It was a pink crayon. Worn down, the paper wrapper peeled away. "For the drive," she whispered. His throat closed completely. He couldn't speak. He just closed his massive, scarred fist around the tiny piece of wax. He nodded once, stood up, and gently pushed her toward Caleb. "Take her inside, Caleb. It's freezing," he rasped. Caleb nodded. He didn't offer a handshake. "You don't touch a dead man." "Drive fast, Wade. Don't look in your mirrors." He turned and walked toward the cabin, Lily shuffling closely behind him. She didn't look back. It was better that way. Wade walked around to the driver's side of the Ford. He reached into the cab and grabbed the black garbage bag off the seat. Next to the porch was a rusted 50-gallon steel drum Caleb used as a burn barrel. A faint trail of smoke drifted up from the white ash at the bottom. He walked over to the barrel. He ripped the garbage bag open. He pulled out the leather cut. It hung heavy in his hand, the thick cowhide stiff with cold. He ran his thumb over the winged skull one last time. 30 years of brotherhood. 30 years of blood, brawls, and miles. His entire identity, stitched into leather. He dropped it into the barrel. He grabbed a red plastic gas can sitting near the porch and splashed a liberal amount of fuel over the vest. He pulled a Zippo lighter from his pocket, flipped the top open, and struck the flint. He tossed the lighter into the barrel. The gas ignited with a loud whoomp. The flames leaped upward, bright orange against the grey morning. The heavy leather curled instantly, black smoke billowing into the pines. The smell of burning cowhide, stale beer, and exhaust fumes filled the air. He stood there for 3 minutes, watching until the winged skull turned to white ash, flaking away in the intense heat, until nothing remained but glowing embers and the charred smell of his past. He turned away from the fire. He walked back to the old Ford. He climbed in, the icy vinyl of the seat biting through his jeans. He put the pink crayon in the ashtray. He started the engine. He put it in gear, and he drove down the mountain, disappearing into the fog. He had no name, no brothers, and no destination. Just a ticking clock and an empty road. And for the first time in 30 years, his chest felt completely light. Hit the like button if Wade's sacrifice moved you, and share this story with someone who appreciates raw, grounded storytelling. If you want more gritty, emotionally charged narratives about the choices that define us in the darkest moments, make sure to subscribe to the channel and ring the bell so you never miss an upload. Your support helps us bring more of these intense, human stories to life. Leave a comment below. Did Wade make the right call, or did he throw his life away? Let's debate in the comments.